first place in your fantasy league or fantasy draft or whatever the heck you do with fantasy football, well, there's one person you need to call, and he's right here. We go across the border with Kyle Senra, and Senra Says is back this week, and he's going to be with us every week with all kinds of fantasy football talk. How are you, my friend?
Hey, Snowman, doing great this morning. How are you?
I'm good. Now I got a bone to pick with you.
Not perfectly good. I knew this was coming.
No, let me be honest. I saw the list, and I cannot, take anybody off of this list. This is a fantasy football list. But y'all know I'm a 49er fan. And there are two of them that are not on this list, ... yet. It's August and ain't September, and I already know what's going on. Here we go. The wide receiver is the position of choice, and we have Senra's top 10 with fantasy football wide receivers. We start in Los Angeles with number 10 with Cooper Kupp.
So it's interesting because I think part of the argument against Cooper Kupp could be the same argument some would use against Debo and Ayuk. Like, who's the real number one wide receiver? Right. I think the big difference, though, between the Rams and the 49ers is the Rams right now do not have a tight end that's going to command the type of target share that George Kittle is going to. Even all their tight ends combined probably aren't going to hit what George Kittle is going to.
Right.
And then while Kyren Williams was getting a lot of pass catches last year, and we think that Blake Corum has that ability too, they could both be receiving backs, they're not to the level of McCaffrey. And the big complication on the 49ers, one thing I've been doing this year is tracking target share for players over the course of their whole careers for every team, like every major receiver, wide receiver, tight end.
Right.
And if you take how much the 49ers have thrown to McCaffrey the last 2 years, which is also coincide with who their quarterback's been the last 2 years. So it's double counting, right? It's okay. Since McCaffrey's been there and since Purdy's been there, they've thrown to the running backs 22.2% of the time, which is basically right at the career averages of George Kittle at 22.4%, Deebo Samuel at 22.5%, and Brandon Ayuk at 22.8%. That is ridiculous, Snowman. I got to tell you.
It is.
No other team even comes close to having 4 players like that. The only team that I found that was something similar, and it doesn't even really count because one of those guys, it doesn't feel like he's good. His career average is really what's going to be the determinant this year, but it's the Miami Dolphins. Tyreek Hill has his career average target share is 24.6%. Waddle's been 23.3%. Beckham, target monster when he's with the Giants, and yes, also with the Browns to a certain extent, 24.3%. So you've got 3 guys in that above 22% range. But even the running back, since Tua has been there, they've only targeted. I mean, last year was up to that 22%, but the average of the 4 years since Tua has been the starter, it's 18.5%. So that's about the only team where it comes close. And guess what? Waddle didn't make this list because he falls a little bit shorter behind Ayuk and Debo. For reference sake, I have them both in the top 20. I have Debo at 14 and Ayuk at wide receiver 16. But yeah, let's talk about their division rival, Cooper Kupp. And that all to say, with the Rams, the way they're set up, all the targets are going to go to their top 2 guys. And it's funny because in most fantasy drafts that I've seen so far, Snowman, Kupp is going after both Debo and Ayuk. So most people would think this would be the guy they'd take out to put in one of them. But I'm willing to kind of forgive Kupp's injuries, thinking, okay, he was injured basically from the start in training camp. That's when I believe he started tweaking his hamstring. Up to this point, he seems like he's healthy. So I'm going to kind of consider him at okay, he is healthy going to the year. He can produce like he normally produces. And what he normally produces is top 10 numbers. I mean, weren't that too long ago when Debo's like insane season, 7 rushing touchdowns and great as a receiver, over 1,000 yards. He was still like 100 points behind Cooper Kupp in fantasy points. And Debo was like wide receiver 2 that year in some formats. An amazing season for Debo. But it feels like if either of those can replicate that feat, it's probably Kupp. So I'm going to bank on Kupp being a top 10 guy. And I think right now you're getting him much later than wide receiver 10. I think he's going to be one of the biggest values in drafts.
To the east we go with number 9, and we find Garrett Wilson from the New York Jets.
And again, banking on injuries. Okay, we know Aaron Rodgers got hurt last year, but we also, by the accounts, it looks like he's recovered and able to play. So I'm going to consider it's going to be an Aaron Rodgers season, which very easily, clearly, even if he's recovering from an Achilles, Garrett Wilson has not even come close to playing with a quarterback this good yet. So
Right.
I think the sky is still the limit for him. We haven't really seen what his ceiling is going to be. And so I'm willing to take a chance at wide receiver 9. This seems, for most of I think for the rest of this list, this seems like these are like the top 9, top 10 guys that are going in drafts.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the range. You're not really getting a discount on him because people are expecting the bounce backs with Rodgers, even though Wilson has kind of failed to live up to expectations. I'm willing to take the chance. I know how good Rodgers has been. I feel like, if anything, it's a less mobile Rodgers needing to just make quicker passes, and maybe a guy like Wilson ends up playing more in the slot, being that like easy dump off target for Rodgers. A lot of quick receptions. I could feel the same thing. So I think last 2 weeks ago we talked about Breece Hall. I was thinking that's why I'm ranked at running back too. I think those two are going to completely dominate targets, kind of like the 2 Rams receivers.
Speaking of the 2 Rams receivers, here's the other one, Puka Nacua, as we go to number 8.
Yeah, sorry, Snowman. I put 2 Rams in the top 10. I didn't even put on it, but honestly,
but with your explanation of why as to how the targets are distributed, especially with an offense like San Francisco and Kansas City, for that matter, I totally understand. I totally get it. I totally get it. I tease you mercilessly about it, but in diving in and looking at the numbers, and San Francisco has historically thrown to running backs a lot. Roger Craig, hello. Ricky Waters, hello. Now they're getting the same with Christian McCaffrey. So you got both Rams receivers on this list, and they both totally belong because look at the production they've been able to put together.
And I mean, if you just again back to 2 weeks ago, where I ranked McCaffrey is kind of indicative of this. Maybe a spoiler for next week, although it's probably not a spoiler. When we're talking top 10 tight ends, I assume no one will be surprised that George Kittle's on my list. And maybe they might be surprised how high I put him. I don't know. We'll see. Mm-hmm. But some might be surprised at Nacua. And I mean, certainly we were all surprised with his production last year. It came out of nowhere, but it's not like he was overly efficient, like ridiculously overly efficient. He was very efficient on a per catch basis, but he just got a lot of targets. Right. And the one thing I've always stuck to as a philosophy is that targets are earned. So for me to see Puka, first game in the NFL, like what was it, 15 targets?
15
that might
targets.
Be, you're not going to see that every game, but to earn that many targets right off the bat from a veteran quarterback, he knows his stuff, and he's okay. There's other guys on this team that have played before. I'm going to the rookie a lot. Mm-hmm. That shows that Nacua was ready to play in the NFL right from the get-go, and B, he already gets it. And I don't expect a big drop, like a sophomore slump for him. Maybe not the production he had last year. I would still draft him in the top 10, clearly. And I'm still, and everyone's drafting it this way. Everyone is drafting to assume Puka is the wide receiver 1 on the team. Right. I guess my only hesitation to not draft him is knowing how much of a value you can get for Cooper Kupp, because the truth is you're probably having to spend your first round pick on Puka. You might be able to get him in the early second. And that's probably maybe as bad a great of an outcome as you can hope for. So you've got to make the investment if you're sitting there at the end of the first. And, you've got to kind of make that decision on Puka. But I think he's worth it, at least at this point.
Speaking of an investment, the Raiders made one in this fellow, Davante Adams. He comes in at number 7 on Sendra's list.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think anyone would have expected, knowing how much Jacoby Myers, as much as he's produced through his career, has struggled to score touchdowns, that you would go with the season where Adams and Myers would score the same number of touchdowns. They both had 8. That's wild to me. And the career year for Myers is also like a career low year for Adams, at least probably. I think his rookie year in Green Bay might have only had 1 touchdown. I think second year might have only had 5. But since then, it's been almost consistently double digits. In my touchdown projections, I've got him at 9, which is tied for 3rd among wide receivers. His target share is certainly up there again. I think he's going to dominate targets, whoever the quarterback is. He's kind of earned that throughout his career. So I'm still willing to make this investment on Adams, again, as a first rounder who he might come as a value too, because you might not have to spend a first round pick on him like you would with Puka and Garrett Wilson. I'd flat up rather have him than those two. And yet in some drafts, you could get away with Adams going later than them. So yeah, watch out for Adams, certainly in the early second round.
At 6, we go to Philadelphia and we find A.J. Brown.
I think I would say, it's tough to say, is it a tier break here or not? Because I do think Brown and Adams will produce similarly. But from what I've seen in most drafts, these seem to be the top 6 receivers going from here on out. So like, kind of my order might not match consensus, but at least the names seem to match. And Brown just got paid too. They clearly, like, the Eagles are signaling both of them, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, are worthy of the investment. I think both, it's actually very similar to the Rams situation where both will get most of the targets. But I think, unlike the Rams, where I think there is some debate on who is the number one when they're both healthy, like really fully healthy Cooper Kupp, is he still the number one there? As good as Devontae Smith is, I think it's clear that A.J. Brown is the number one guy for Jalen Hurts. He's going to target him the most. I think there's some good touchdown upside there. Brown's also been really efficient on a yards basis. He's someone who can get good yards after the catch. So even on a lesser targeted seasons, he still managed to produce monster years. Now he kind of gets best of both worlds, where he can be efficient with a great quarterback, but also get tons of volume on a team that's willing to throw the ball. So I'm back in on A.J. Brown as a top 6 receiver.
We've now reached our top 5. And speaking of volume and speaking of production, here's one of Victor's favorites. At number 5, we go to Detroit and we find Amon-Ra St. Brown.
My wife and I just finished this season 2 of the Netflix series Receiver this year. Is what they and Amon-Ra was one of the guys they followed. And just talking with her about like the receivers, and she was, I think Adams explained the route tree, and that was kind of mind blowing to her learning all this. But I think one thing I kept going back to is Amon-Ra might be the best yards after the catch receiver in the NFL. If he's not the best, he's certainly in that elite tier where it's one or two other guys, maybe even better than A.J. Brown, that we just mentioned. And yeah, getting the volume. Honestly, these two guys are super similar to me. You could almost flip them back and forth, Amon-Ra and A.J. Brown. But I think Amon-Ra has just a little bit more upside to potentially be the number one wide receiver overall. I think A.J. Brown has that in his range of outcomes, but I feel like Amon-Ra, he could get closer to achieving that more realistically. So he kind of kicks off the top 5. And I think this is kind of, now we get into the top 4 in a tier of its own. But I wouldn't be upset, or I'd certainly understand if someone thought this was still too low for Amon-Ra, because he could finish as the wide receiver 1. As much as that pains me to say as a Packers fan who despises the Lions, man, they made a smart pick there. A lot of teams did not that year. They're like, I know Amon-Ra can memorize all those names. He mentioned it on the show. I knew most. I mean, I knew Amari Rodgers. That was. I hated that pick from the moment that was made, and then to see Amon-Ra go later to them, oh boy. I have a feeling this is going to be really bad, and it turned out way worse than I could have even imagined. At least better for the Lions than I could have imagined. So good for them. When he mentioned that Daz Newsome went ahead of him in the draft, I completely forgot about. I almost forgot he existed. But that was one that shocked me. The Amari Rodgers one I remembered forever. It's still awful no matter what. But that I carried that. Daz Newsome. That blew my mind.
That blew my mind also. I still can't remember who the hell Daz Newsome is. I saw him in college, I think, a couple of times, but you remember the name.
The Titans drafted him, and I think he got hurt in that first year in training camp, so he missed the whole rookie season, and then a year or two just never came back, and they cut him. Like, you didn't play a game. Like, I think it was that bad. So it's good for the Lions, and good for you if you take Amon-Ra. Kind of now we're getting to the point where you've got to spend like a middle first round pick on him.
Now we go into our top 4, and here's a receiver that my wife despises, but can also say one of the best in the business. You know him well, Cincinnati, Jamar Chase.
So the one thing that really separates Chase from everyone else in a negative sense is the target share. And while he's still very clearly the number 1 receiver, he might not get as heavily targeted as some of these other guys at the top. In my target share projections for this year, I've got him at 26.5%. That's lower than the last two. A.J. Brown at 27.1. It's even lower than Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua. And lower than Garrett Wilson, actually. So he's a lot lower on the target share ranking. I think he'd still be in the top 10, but just at the back of it. But I also think there's no receiver, other than maybe one, and we'll get to him eventually, that has more touchdown upside than Chase. He's got this like spike week magic in him where if he puts up 3 touchdowns on any given week, you're not surprised. He just has that ability. So I think this is a tough calculation, because like even Amon-Ra, you can include in this. Like, these are all guys you're having to take in the early first round. Like this is going to be your top 5 picks, or your top 6 picks, along with probably Christian McCaffrey, maybe a Breece Hall or Bijan gets mixed in there. But what do you want? Do you want the floor or the upside? I think that the calculation between the two would lead me to put Chase here at 4. But I certainly could get why he could be higher, or why he should be behind even A.J. Brown. So I've got him at 4, but he's been a tricky one to rank, because he is just a little bit different than all these other guys that are just monster target earners, and he's up there, but just not quite to that elite tier of target earners. But he's probably the most elite touchdown scorer. So it's the balance of what do you prefer. I wouldn't be shocked if he finishes the wide receiver 1 and someone wants to take him as the wide receiver 1 in drafts just because they like that he's tied to that quarterback. They like that offense. So 4 for me, but I can certainly understand arguments why he should be higher or lower. So it's tricky.
Speaking of arguments, there's this guy, Justin Jefferson from the Minnesota Vikings. He clocks in at number 3.
So I've got Jefferson in my target share projections leading the NFL this year with I think I've at 29.3%. But compared to all these guys here, I guess other than Amon-Ra, I've got him with less touchdowns. I've got him projected for 8, whereas A.J. Brown's at 9. Devontae Adams is at 9. Even Cooper Kupp's at 9. So I think Jefferson and Amon-Ra are actually super similar because I've got both with 8 touchdowns, but I just have Jefferson a full percent higher in target share. And that's enough to, say, jump ahead of Jamar Chase and get into this top 3. I do think there'll be concerns with quarterback. Definitely won't be playing with Kirk Cousins anymore. It's going to be a down no matter who it is. I mean, even if McCarthy ends up eventually being as good as Cousins, he's not going to be as good as Cousins right now.
Mm-hmm.
But we also saw last year, Jefferson, especially the very end of the season, once he was over the injuries, he was having I think wide receiver 2 overall weeks with Nick Mullins. So he's shown he's so special. He can catch the ball from anywhere as long as it's in his catch radius. His hands are probably the best set of hands in the NFL. I really think I don't know if correct me if I'm wrong, Terry. I think DeAndre Hopkins. That's probably the only guy that you could say maybe has better hands than Jefferson just because he's done it for all these years. But it's that level of ability to catch the football. And that's the most important thing for a receiver. So it wouldn't shock me if he leads the league in targets and catches, but falls a little bit behind on the touchdowns because of the quarterback quality, especially even compared to Chase, but certainly compared to really all these guys in the top 10. He's probably got by far the worst quarterback. So he's good enough to be ahead of most everyone at 3, but not entirely everyone as he is at 3.
Well, Victor's going to really have a smile on his face because at number 2, we find number 88, CeeDee Lamb from the Dallas Cowboys.
I believe he finishes the wide receiver 1 overall last year. Now, even Jefferson, what happened to him the year after he does it, he gets injured, right? It's notoriously difficult to repeat as the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy. I don't know. Do you know the last 2 guys to have done it, Snowman?
Mm-mm.
So one was fairly recently, 2014 through 2016. Antonio Brown did it 3 years in a row.
Antonio Brown.
When he was at that point the best wide receiver in the NFL, he finally gave Roethlisberger the numbers to kind of merit him that Hall of Fame worthiness that everyone talks about now.
Mm-hmm.
I think if Brown was never there, we wouldn't be talking about Ben as a Hall of Fame quarterback. He obviously had 2 Super Bowls without Antonio Brown, so that can't take that away. But all of Ben's best seasons came with Brown. That was Brown's ability. The last guy to do it before Brown was Jerry Rice. So this is not an easy feat to do. And so CeeDee Lamb, it has that stacked against him. I don't think he's that level, Antonio Brown or Jerry Rice. So I don't think he'll finish number 1. And if you were telling me to rank these guys based on likelihood of finishing number 1, I'd probably put him at 6. I think he's probably even behind A.J. Brown, but certainly he's behind Amon-Ra and Chase and Jefferson.
Yeah.
But while I don't think he'll finish as likely to be finished as wide receiver 1, I still think top 3 finishes in his range of outcomes. He's in my projections. He's second in target share behind only Jefferson. In the touchdown projections, he's tied for 3rd, only behind Devontae Adams not Devontae Adams, tied with Devontae Adams, but only behind Jamar Chase and someone else who we won't spoil, even though by this point people probably know who's number 1. So it's just as much I can totally get why people are drafting him as the wide receiver 1, but man, that's dangerous just because you're tempting fate that they're repeating as wide receiver 1.
Yes.
And I still think Lamb will finish fine, but I can totally get why you might want to go with Jefferson or Chase ahead of him. He's going to finish at 2 for me, but there's one guy that just a little bit higher.
And this is the guy. Let's go to South Florida, and we find the one and only Tyreek Hill from the Miami Dolphins.
In my dynasty rankings, he's way behind everyone other than say Kupp and Adams, but he's behind all those guys just because of the age. But you're talking about a 1-season redraft. I think Tyreek Hill is the perfect receiver to draft as the number 1 receiver. And there's 2 reasons. I think it's the best of both worlds of everything I've been talking about. It's the best of what Jefferson has, but also the best of what Chase has. So I think he's got tremendous touchdown upside. In fact, I have him projected for the most scrimmage touchdowns among wide receivers. And part of that is top of his own catching ability and his ability to just be so fast that you can't catch him. Well, that helps with the rushing touchdowns, and they're willing to give him carries, especially near the goal line at times. So he can also get some sneaky upside with these like free trick plays where he just gets a 2-yard run and suddenly, that's 6 points right there. So he's got that in his outcome, but I also think just monster target share. It's been 30% every year. Because I'm going with like median range of outcomes projections. I've got him at 28.6%. That would be third. So it's the same type of target share that Jefferson and Lamb are getting, but with like Chase's upside in terms of touchdowns. Right. So to me, I think he's the best and most obvious answer to be wide receiver 1 in fantasy drafts this
year. Is there any question? I mean, come on, it's Tyreek Hill. It's Tyreek Hill, and you got Tua throwing to him. I just hope the Dolphins put enough of an offensive line in front of Tua to keep him upright.
I mean, it worked last year. It was the receivers that got hurt instead of Tua, but
exactly
too much. Yeah, that O-line needs some.
You really don't want to tempt fate. And I talked earlier this week about, I'm not hating on Tua at all. I am just worried about his health, especially 2 years ago after he took 3 concussions in a span of 14 weeks. Being a fella that's taken a couple of concussions, it's not easy to bounce back from. That's Kyle.
So I think we're certainly happy he played a full season last year.
I am so happy.
It is one of those things that you might get nervous about every year. But.
Yep. And I don't want to get nervous about him playing a full year. I want to see him continue to play a full year. Just protect him, please. That's Kyle Senra in his top 10 fantasy football wide receivers. And he joins us every week to talk all things fantasy football. Thank you, my friend, so very, very much. I love having you on. I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, thank you, Snowman. I guess we got one position left next week.
Yep, we do. Thanks, man. Why were you yawning, Victor?
I wasn't yawning. What are you talking about?
Kidding. Totally kidding. I nearly did, but and that's, like I said, that's just because physical exhaustion. We had a couple comments. Damian Hernandez says Justin Jefferson gonna struggle getting the ball with how JJ, i.e. JJ McCarthy, throws. I doubt he gets any touchdowns this season. I doubt that. I doubt that. We'll see. Question: with this being Tyreek's last year playing, do y'all think he could win MVP? Nope. And I'll give you 2 reasons why. Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
On a third, Deebo Samuel. On a fourth, George the Animal Kittle. On a fifth, Nick Bosa.
He's gonna say the entire Niners roster.
Well, not all of them, no.
But it's gonna be a rough, a tough road to hoe for
it is
the MVP selection.
It is. It's gonna be so competitive this year, and I can't wait to see it. Hall of Fame game tonight is at 8 p.m. Eastern. The Houston Texans and the Chicago Bears.
God.
Do y'all really want to watch that game?
No.
Matter of fact,
got me up.
Agreed.
I mean, I understand if it was CJ Stroud versus, I don't know, maybe Brock Purdy. I can get that. If it's CJ Stroud versus Patrick Mahomes. And they're both only going to play a series anyway because you want to save them for the whole season. I mean, but against a team like the Bears that need a quarterback to play the entire 4 quarters.
I mean, CJ Stroud versus Lamar Jackson would be a better matchup.
Been there, done that, called that, was on the edge of my seat for the entire game. I'd love to see them do it again in the playoffs. I'd love to see them do it. I'd love to see them do it in the playoffs. Why do you need liquor, Damien? What they say?
Shut up.
I'm going to beat Victor up. We got to get out of here. Later today, I will welcome A Pizzle himself in a live interview, and you will see and hear it also tomorrow during the Football Friday edition of Snowman in the Morning. In the meantime, we got to go. Have a great day. God bless. Remember to make your next move your best move. And always remember, if your dreams don't scare you, they're simply not big enough. Dream big, do bigger. We are, and we hope y'all are too. And I'll say it right now for February, Chiefs Kingdom, bang, bang, Niner gang. We're out of here. See you tomorrow. Dear White Sox, just tank the rest of the season, will you please? So you can get some better draft picks. And this is coming from a White Sox fan. Say tomorrow.